We are training the next generation to meet the strategic challenges of tomorrow. We are dedicated to understanding in order to act better.
We now turn to our keynote speaker, Daniel Jean, who was National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada. He was previously Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Canada. Among his many current affiliations, Daniel Jean is a member of the Strategic Council of the Network for Strategic Analysis. Daniel, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. It's really a pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Julien. Merci beaucoup au Réseau de l'analyse stratégique et aux organisateurs pour l'invitation. J'ai apprécié la session du matin et j'espère pouvoir participer aux sessions de l'après-midi, même si, comme beaucoup de parents et grands-parents au Québec, dans le reste du Canada, mais d'après ce que j'ai pu voir avec Gustave tout à l'heure et également en Europe, la pandémie oblige, nous devons jongler nos activités avec professionnels et l'appui de l'école à distance, de l'animation de nos enfants et de nos petits-enfants. Dans mon cas, vous aurez sans doute deviné que je suis dans le rôle du grand-père. Mon allocution va être en anglais, la langue de la conférence, mais il me fera plaisir de répondre à vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. Fabulous panel before, chair with the able hand of Jill Sinclair. She referred to the Rolling Stones. Well, like they do, she rocks and she rolls. It's a privilege for me to work with Jill and a pleasure as well in training next waves of public sector executive in Canada and synthesizing them on security and intelligence issues. You've chosen a relevant and timely theme for the conference. Through my remarks, what I'm going to try to do is to demonstrate that intelligence corporation, a corporation that transcends the inner circles of government and the expert residence of security and intelligence agencies, is more than ever required for Canada and its allies to navigate this complex multipolar world. Now, multipolar, for sure, but let's be honest, with a major competition confrontation taking place at center stage between the two giants that are China and the US. I'll try to do so in three segments. First, I want to highlight some of the key elements of the current world environment to lay the scene of what it means for the intelligence function and cooperation for countries like Canada, but its allies. In the second segment, I wish to draw on how these elements should inform the intelligence priorities, the activities, and the behaviors. And in my third and final segment, I'd like to focus in a more targeted way on what navigating an intelligence corporation that transcends the inner sanctums of government may mean for a country like Canada, but many of countries that participants are from. So let's look at that first segment, multipolar world. Sure, but with a major geopolitical, geoeconomic confrontation between China and the US at the center stage. I wish to be clear at the onset that as much of the use of the term multipolar as theme of the conference suggests a distribution of power in which more than two nation states have nearly equal amounts of military, cultural, and economic influence, we're now observing this major confrontation between two giants. This is, to some extent, many observers say, a new Cold War, but this time the confrontation that transcends government and where geopolitical and geoeconomic interests are closely intertwined. This strategic competition is as much at play in accessing key transportation routes, critical infrastructure, data, the new currency in the smart wired world, the standards that govern many of these things, transportation, infrastructure, data, and in acquiring or developing new and best technological innovation from the excellence centers of universities and the research and development departments of state-of-the-art technology companies. Now, we should not underestimate the military considerations of the confrontation, but the race for the economic and technological advantage is paramount and in fact serve the military ambitions. Many experts have highlighted that there's no traditional geopolitical or military playbook to fight this new form of a Cold War. While the two giants that China and the US will remain center stage, we do observe a resurgence of Russia. Now, they may no longer represent the threat that they've been in the past, whether on the geopolitical, strategic, military front, and they've never been much of a competitor in the geoeconomics arena. But they can still, through regional actions, hybrid warfare tactics, proxy actions, be a major troublemaker. In fact, when I served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2013 to 2016, right at the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis, I used to say that Russia had a disruptive foreign policy agenda, one that supports national interests by nurturing problems without owning it at the expense of the states that they want to bother. It is difficult to imagine that the Ukraine crisis and the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 or the Syrian war did not undermine the strategic aim and implementation of the pivot to Asia that the Obama administration very much knew was required. Through foreign interference actions aimed at serving their national interests, whether it was a cyber attack on WADA in 2016 to retaliate on IOC and World Anti-Doping sanctions, whether the meddling in elections in Montenegro and the US, or more recently, a massive intelligence cyber acts like SolarWinds, Russia is demonstrating a relatively low investment, some cyber capabilities, working closely with traditional field spies, and the instrumentalization of oligarchs can both serve intelligence needs and threaten democratic institutions of those who they see at odds with their own interests. Now, one parallel to keep in mind between the US-China competition and the Russian hybrid warfare activities, the theaters, whether the mindset of citizens, critical infrastructure, or technology companies are no longer private only to governments. Finally, for those of us who had predicted the end of the nation state, well, the global pandemic and the current competition for the supply of strategic resources, so think about PPE and vaccines in the context of the pandemic, or think about rare earth and semiconductors in the current technological race, have reminded us that some of the dangers of over-reliance on not so friendly or risky geographic areas, supply chains, to our national interests. This is a rather somber picture, so let me try to introduce a few optimistic remarks. First of all, on the US-China confrontation. Alliances and coalition of likely-minded are back in style and somehow striking back. It's both a combination of realisms that you cannot win on the bilateral track with China and the arrival of a US president that seeks and nurtures alliances. So there's an opportunity for transatlantic cooperation that can encourage normal behaviors and punish transgressions or excesses. The success of President Xi to centralize his power and establish himself as an iconic leader make him all the most vulnerable because he will be the single point of accountability if China cannot sustain significant wealth generation and its distribution. In a closely intertwined geopolitical, geoeconomics war, where a lot of the strategic advantages are going to come from technological innovation, despite their capacity to invest and the huge progress that they have accomplished, some of the inherent constraints of authoritarian regimes will hamper China when it comes to innovation. You have to read Richard Florida to understand how open, creative societies are key to innovation. And finally, a point I've been making with my colleagues for the last few years, you should never underestimate the resilience of the United States. Now, on the Russian hybrid warfare tactics, my more optimistic comments. First of all, some of the surprise effect is gone. We now have a better appreciation of the aim and the tactics, and we're better prepared to anticipate and counteract, although we still have a long way to go in terms of being able to inform citizens or institutions on the methodologies, the aim, and why we should be very much aware and mindful of Russian tactics. Now, what does this new world environment mean for the intelligence function and cooperation? Well, in the same manner that governments and their key assets are no longer the sole targets of foreign state actors, intelligence agencies no longer have the monopoly of collection, assessment, and dissemination of intelligence. Let's start with collection. Security and intelligence agencies need to be able to better leverage open source, such as major business intelligence firms and consulting groups that are global, and international media in order to leverage their global presence and access to governments, business entities, and key civic actors around the globe to produce quality intelligence that can guide strategy and investigative media, who at times have exclusive, overt, but sometimes even covert access. Think about some of the media that are able to interview people that have been in hiding for years in some of the terrorism threats. Secondly, security intelligence agencies also need to better cooperate with private and other non-government entities in securing useful intelligence from these new sources without compromising their independence or their safety. Now, with regards to the assessment function, an ongoing engagement with these new non-government targets is essential to better understand the threats and possible mitigations and the learnings that can be shared with other potential targets. What you create is you create a team Canada. It's not a team security and intelligence. It's a team, Canada working for prosperity and security, to take a Canadian example. With regards to dissemination, well, we definitely need, the security and intelligence agencies definitely need to expand their client base to equip these non-government targets, maybe universities, technology companies in the race to technological advantage, or the media and citizens, for example, in the fight against state-sponsored disinformation, to be able to recognize and mitigate threats. Now, with regards to cooperation, allies and likely minded must appreciate that their own national interests are better served if both through intelligence sharing, allying actions, whether with the carrot of diplomacy or the stick of sanctions or other means for the most serious transgressions, actors are encouraged to comply with international norms, whether it's fair competition on the economic front or human rights. Now, existing alliances or coalitions, whether NATO and the military front, whether applicable, when it's applicable, or the Five Eyes, remain critical assets in the collection, assessment, and the sharing of intelligence. Five Eyes, for example, is a mature work-sharing model that allows each member to contribute some of their unique skills knowledge in a complementary way. I underline what I've said, work-sharing model, because the question I often get as a Canadian on the Five Eyes is, well, we contribute so little in volume. We're primarily a client, a user. Yet, when I traveled either as a Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs or as a former national security advisor around the world, what I discovered in the other Five Eyes capitals was the very specific capabilities, talent, technological innovations that had been developed in some of our security integrity agencies that were being used by the others. So it's the value of the contribution that is important. It's not the volume of the contribution. But one also needs to look at the extensive work that has been conducted by the EU Commission on the acquisition, procurement of sensitive technologies by China, and the work of some of the member states in Europe to appreciate that while we may not have the mechanism that have the maturity of a Five Eyes, we do have interest in sharing both intelligence and also ideas around policy development and mitigation. It is on our common interest. Now, I want to be very clear that if you want to do this, if our security and intelligence agencies want to be successful in doing so, it starts at home by establishing a much better partnership between our security intelligence agencies and our economic and social departments. Because there is nothing that would be more powerful in terms of reaching to technological firms, to civic societies, to excellent centers in our universities on some of the key technologies, than seeing that there is a nice integrated assessment that the prosperity and the security of our country is in recognizing both the opportunities and the threat that comes with new technology, or the threats that something like disinformation could represent. Now, particularly relevant for this conference and most of you who are in the business of education, we need a new breed of intelligence experts. an important point, particularly for those of you who train the next wave of intelligence analysts. We need to re-examine the competency requirements. The ability to conduct outreach externally with actors like state major corporations, state-of-the-art technology startups, small and medium-sized enterprise in Canada, technology excellence centers in university require different skill sets to complement the existing human capital that are security intelligence. Your traditional S&I officers are not the best to go and conduct these outreaches. In the positions that I had a chance to work very closely with a lot of the CEOs and senior executives of corporations who would tell me, we need to reframe the partnership. It's not very helpful when people from the agencies that you work with come to tell us, there is a threat, this is a serious threat, you should really be careful about this, but by the way, we can tell you nothing about this because we would be jeopardizing our intelligence. Somehow we need to be able to translate that knowledge in something that is operational. In the same way, if we're seeing that the threat is more and more coming on the technological innovation side, on the digital side, that will mean that your multidisciplinary approach that you've taken to graduate learning will also need to include technology literacy. In the same way that many of you have developed expertise in critical infrastructure in the height of the terrorism threat. Let's be clear, I'm not saying that the S&I need engineers. Maybe a few can help. What we need is we need intelligence officers who are literate in technology so they can have meaningful exchanges within the theaters where the action is actually going to take place. So it takes me to my third segment. What does an intelligence corporation that transcends the inner sanctums of government may mean for a country like Canada? Well, in reaction to the current state of the world, this US-China confrontation, the nefarious activities by countries like Russia, and the challenges of the international normative order, be it the UN, the WTO, or others, many experts stress that Canada, who has for the longest time benefited from its security, alliance, and market access to its neighbor, the United States, that Canada no longer lives in the world where the failure to anticipate or making mistakes has limited consequences. Thomas Junot, who's the co-organizer of this conference, he likes to say that we're no longer living in this benevolent world and that we will need sound intelligence to support our prosperity and national security interests because mistakes nowadays may have significant impact on both our prosperity and our security. I would take, for example, the Arctic. Interestingly, you read very little in our Canadian media about the Arctic, but I have not heard one academic that has come at numerous forums that I've organized in the last year to try to sensitize our public servants to national security and how it plays in national interest, that have not spoken about the importance of the Arctic in our national interest. The Arctic is opening up. Climate change is having a major impact. You're going to have a major competition around resources. In the past, we've seen primarily a sovereignty threat coming from the Russian angle. Well, in the last decade, you've seen China spending more and more attention to, because they always have the long ball game, the transportation route that it could become decades from now. That competition for resources is going to bring some interesting behaviors. We have an opportunity to try to marry our security intelligence needs and priorities with some of the work that is required on the Arctic side. The Department of Defense at this stage is working on the renewal of NORAD. We also know from the last defense strategy that they're also working on modernizing the North Warning systems, who've gone beyond their useful years in terms of a key intelligence tool for that part of the world. It creates, in my view, a key sovereignty angle, making sure that we have good continental defense with our partner, that we develop good intelligence tools. But in doing that, we do this in a smart way, like we did in the past by leveraging the ancestor, the North Warning system, to bring technological to populations in the north. That we try to make sure that we can, given the threat that climate change in itself constitute, that we try to see how in doing the modernizations of some of our assets, they are bringing communication, we can also help with the adaptation for local population. Now, the business case for intelligence, interestingly, has never been so clear for a country like Canada that for the most part of history has been spared by major threats. Being exempt from threats has meant that our security and intelligence awareness, culture, and ecosystem is limited, particularly outside government, whether you look at think tanks, media, or the public discourse. The nature of this evolving threat, one that targets key national interest imperatives, like our ability to generate wealth through innovation and the need to protect our democratic institutions, are factors that should assist in attracting more attention to the importance. We need to make the media and citizens more aware and conscious of the new world, not through fears, but an informed pursuit of opportunities. In this context, the ability for security and intelligence agencies to offer value to a private sector in pursuing prosperity and to our civil societies in the protection of democratic values is the best way to develop a constituency that support their important work and activities. I would say it's a currency for our security and intelligence agencies. I know it is a positive step, the effort that CSIS is deploying to connect with our private sector and university sectors, and our CSC, through our most recent cyber strategy and the development of an externally looking Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, is trying to make Canadian businesses and citizens more resilient to cyber to come out of the shadow. But this partnership must mature. It must become iterative and systemic engagement. Take, for example, the threat of cybersecurity. We have to go from just sharing information to be able to practice having tabletops with our key sectors and making sure that our muscles are well flexed so that we can deal with the threats of today. A sound value proposition would be one where businesses and citizens benefit from the government's expertise on threats, methods, and potential mitigation, and as such are more than willing to share back in exchange to support the evolving knowledge and mitigation agencies that our intelligence and security groups need. When I speak to academics, military leaders, and public sector executives, they often bring the question of structural change as the solution to enable the pan-governmental integrated approach to the new threats that I've described. I've recently come across this very interesting Associated Press op-ed written by an anonymous author, a former senior government well-versed on US-China intelligence and policy issues, that was published in January in Political on a possible playbook in handling China. Title is To Counter China's Rise, the US should focus on Xi, and it's a proposal for a full reboot of the American strategy toward China. I particularly enjoyed the following paragraph in the conclusion that summarized what should guide our efforts. Such an approach will require an unprecedented level of US national and international policy coordination. It will require the rebuilding of the US Foreign Service in USA. It will require the complete integration of the efforts of the Department of State, Defense, Treasury, and Commerce, the Office of the US Trade Representative, USAID, and the intelligence community. This will mean that future national security advisors, augmented with the best high-level support staff, will need to be individually responsible for full coordination and final execution of the United States long-term China strategy. I take it more at the more personal leadership level. Previous clerks, which are the head of the public service in Canada, Treasury Board secretaries, and colleagues in the public service have often asked me why I seem to have more comfort and relative success in driving horizontal government initiative. I've always stressed that I focus more on governance than structure, and that while serving in central agencies, I use the convening power that central agencies have in a Westminster model like Canada, and influence to leverage the talent, the real expertise and capacity where it resides, i.e., in the department agencies, and conjuring their strengths in pursuing common cause and objective. Yes, you need great analytical talent at the center to synthesize a departmental contribution into strategic advice for prime minister or cabinet ministers and cabinet process. But the successful implementation of the strategy has to reside with the empowered relevant organizations that have the legal instruments, the authorities, the capacity, and the expertise in place to be able to pursue that mission. This type of approach is far more promising than a lot of energy wasted into structures that are already usually outdated for the problem that you want to solve by the time they're fully functional. So to sum up, a multipolar world set, of course, but let's be honest, we have to navigate a world with a live confrontation between two giants at center stage. Unlike previous confrontation, the competition is as much economic as it is geopolitical, and the combating fields in theaters outside governments. In this context, we need to retool all we do and share intelligence and policies to allow government to pursue national interests in a reality where prosperity and security are closely intertwined. Ce chemin est parsemé d'adversités, mais comme Corneille l'a si bien dit, à vaincre sans péril, on triomphe sans gloire. Now let's hear from the real experts, you in the virtual room, and be happy to answer your questions and react to some of your comments. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Daniel, pour cette excellente présentation. Thank you very much. Very insightful and broad overview of what's ahead for Canada, but also other liberal democracies in this very uncertain world. I'm going to turn to questions from the audience. I see two now, and I encourage others to write down their questions in the Q&A box from Zoom. And we have about 15 minutes before we head back to lunch. First question by Wesley Wark. Could you comment on what would be needed in terms of legislative and cultural change to effect the kind of new partnerships between the intelligence community and private sector's entities?
I would say in response to Wesley that while they may be need to adjust some authorities here and there, this has to do a lot more with culture. And that while we're making progress, like for example, when me and colleagues like Malcolm Brown, when he was public safety deputy minister in Canada and others, were trying to engage with our economic and social colleagues to speak about the new threats, whether they were on the economic side, whether there's the information side, and how we needed to break the silos between the S&I community and the things. It wasn't easy at the beginning. I was reflecting that it was a bit almost like these first dance, right? When you go to middle school, where everybody stay on each side and they're trying to judge each other. It has come a long way. The private sector, the corporations that are global in nature, many of them were already acutely aware of the needs to look at prosperity and security through a very much an integrated lens. I think where leadership is challenging and difficult is to be able to take this, when I describe, for example, what our director of CSIS is trying to do and open up the private sectors, and it's to do the same thing at the organization level. It's to make it systemic. And for this, I would say we are in the early stages, but very encouraging signs.
Thank you. Now from Jim Cox, there is a difference between training to do intelligence and education about intelligence. The US, UK, and Australia have established intelligence education professional development programs. There's no such program in Canada. Will we get one or make one? Or I should ask, should we make one?
So, and I'm not sure, Jim, when you say there's none in Canada, if you mean none that is an external program, so that resides in a public institution, in external institutions, because with regards to the government itself, There are intelligence programs. There is one in terms of strategic intelligence that is run by the Intelligence Assessment Secretariat with very strong, close coordination with the rest of the security agencies. And of course, the specific agencies run more specific security intelligence programs for their own constituency that are more specific to their mandate and authorities. And then one thing that we started to do, and I was talking about the involvement I had with Jill right now, is we are starting to take the awareness about how geopolitics and geoeconomics are intertwined and how our prosperity has to be very mindful of threats that come with the opportunities of new technology and things like that. We're very much trying to bring that to community of executives that do not reside in the SNI community, because that's the way to change the culture, to go back to Westlake's question earlier.
Thank you. Now, from an anonymous spectator, the traditional question, I should say, about Canada and intelligence issues: should Canada establish a foreign human intelligence collection agency?
I think that this is, I don't think I've ever given a talk when I'm not asked this question. And I always give the same answers. I'm sorry, I'm going to be boring. I think that on that question, we got to be very careful not to be Canadian. What I mean by that: it would be too easy to say, oh, this is a tool we don't have in our arsenal, we really need it, and go and create it, but not resources or resources at the expense of our existing capacity that is already limited. So I go back to my example of what I said earlier about our contribution to the Five Eyes. Five Eyes is a work sharing arrangement. It's the most systemic intelligence sharing organization that we have. I think we are better served to have more capacity in the existing capabilities and do a good job and contribute to our allies than if we have to create a human foreign side of it, but not be in the position to resource it or make it in competition to what already stressed capacity. So this is a conversation I've often had about our military. You know, should we, for example, our military, continue to try to pretend we do everything, or should we find some of the areas where we're very good, special forces and others, and then decide that this will be to our alliance or key? Because when you try to have a general army or all the facets of intelligence activities, if you're not prepared to put the dollars, and it's an expensive business, there's a good chance that you actually undermine your mission.
Thank you. Another question, more focused. You mentioned that Canada should organize more tabletop exercises with key sectors. Can you list some exercises that should be considered, especially with regards to telecommunications and ICT counterintelligence sectors?
So what I'm trying to say here is we now have a much better appreciation of the threats. Just look at the most recent one, SolarWinds, right? We've given ourselves the tools in the last national security legislation. We've given ourselves the tools that if there is a foreign sponsored attack on some of our key infrastructure, on some of our key sectors, our banking sector, for example, which is a very strong sector in Canada, that our security and agencies should be able to partner, you know, with the blessing of two ministers. It's a two key thing. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has to be, but should be in the position to be able to help. If you're trying to say to your private sector and your citizens that they need to be more aware, more resilient, and be prepared to fight intrusions that are sophisticated because they are supported by foreign state actors, I think you're going to have to be prepared to learn and practice with them. Having this in theory, having information theory is one thing. What we found, and you just look at the current situation with pandemic, when you go into practice, when you experience how difficult it is to implement strategy, when you draw lessons and you try to make sure that you're better informed the next time it's going to come around, you will be much better protected. This is one thing that we need to learn from the military. This is this whole notion of preparedness. Now, in the new world that we are in, I think our security and intelligence agency need to be able to partner on something like this, like they need to be partnering on how not so friendly states may try to acquire the next best technology. I mean, for example, we are one of the leading country in artificial intelligence. We should be working very closely with our artificial intelligence assets in Montreal, in Toronto, to make sure that we are Team Canada protecting this great technology that's going to serve us so well, but at the same time could be ill used if we're not careful.
Next question ties in with your last comments. The US is currently struggling to find a balance between cybersecurity info sharing with industry while avoiding liability concerns such as lawsuits due to industry disclosing that they were impacted by incidents. Do you have any recommendations for Canada in this regard?
It's a tough one, right? So I think this is one where you have to aim for the heart of the possible. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to be able to disclose everything. You're going to have to develop a trustworthy relationship with the private sector. That the more we are constructive in the way we approach it, the more that we don't make it a private sector against the government, the more we'll be able to share, and vice versa, what we need from them in terms of reinforcing our knowledge and building our protection. So I think that this is something that you can just get better at by doing it. Like, you could spend a lot of time to try to develop the frameworks and the things, get at it, get better at it, and then you can see how you can improve the risk as you gain experience doing this.
Next question is from Chile, from Simon Yantan. What about cooperation with regions other than Europe and US? What does cooperation with, say, Latin America, Africa, or Southeast Asia would mean for such a middle power such as Canada for issues such as transnational organized crime, different types of traffic, money laundering, and others?
So, bueno tarde. I think it's a very, very good question. And I think that, for example, when you take, and he's taken, I think, for example, in one of his examples is a global example. We cannot succeed in money laundering if somehow our ability to understand the channels by which money is laundered, the methodologies, and how best to go after that, and then having strong legislations and having strong enforcement that go after that, and laws that allows to take the proceeds. We cannot be successful at doing this if we're not doing that globally, because otherwise you will see it's like tax evasions. The flows will just go to the weakest link. So in areas like this, I think it is our benefit to cooperate. And it's our benefit to cooperate on the intelligence information exchange as the way to build the right legislative frameworks that can allow us to better mitigate these threats.
Great. Question now from Mathieu Desjardins. I'm translating his questions written in French. You mentioned that Canada contributes through the Five Eyes in some specific niche areas. Could you elaborate on what are those perhaps key contributions Canada makes to the Five Eyes Alliance?
And I got to do that without being killed, right? or prosecuted under the secret acts. So I'm going to say general, of course, but like, for example, the folks that CSEC, if we look at that foreign intelligence and cyber intelligence, the folks that CSEC hires are some of the best mathematicians, engineers in Canada. They come from the best schools. They come from the Waterloo, the Sherbrooke, those Polytech schools that really bring some of the best talent. And not surprisingly, because they come from these schools, they develop technology at times, new methods that may actually create an advantage for allies through that partnership that way with the Five Eyes that we'll be able to exploit for a while. So that's one area. If I go outside just the CSEC, but but marry it to some of our broader interests. We have knowledge, we have experience in some areas of the globe, sometimes without the baggage of others, that is good currency for some of our allies. Just take, for example, an example for the country, but an example for myself. I served twice in Haiti. I continue to follow very closely what happens there. We have an extremely important Asian diaspora in Canada. There are countries like this where, for a variety of factors, we have more knowledge than some of our partners, and through the work sharing thing, it will make a lot more sense for Canadians to provide information on some of these areas than others. And that's the beauty of Five Eyes. People always say it's an information sharing. It's more than information sharing, it's a work sharing arrangement.
Thanks. I'm going to take two more questions and then let you rest a bit. Next question. What perspectives would you have on Canadian attempts to develop a foreign agent register? To what extent will such a framework be responsive to the threats that Canada faces? And are there any legal or policy reforms that are urgent required in the modern national security context?
Okay. So to your first question, not sure exactly what you mean by that, but I would suspect that it may bring us to an area where right now there's no authorities, there's no legislative framework to operate. It goes back to the question about the human foreign intelligence. So there are some very specific authorities that are in place for CSIS on what they can and cannot do. Of course, they can look at foreign intelligence in terms of the Canadian scene. The CSEC as a foreign intelligence role, as you know, on the cyber global platform. So I'm just gonna, that question I'll be brief, because if I understand correctly what you mean, this is probably an area where right now we have framework. Now, legal and policy reforms. I think one of the major challenge we have in Canada, and this is something that I find with all my conversations with both people in the academic sectors, people outside government, and some of the executives that are going up the ranks in the public service. There is very limited legislative space. When you think about and we're lucky, we got usually 4 years agenda. Think about Australia, New Zealand, 3 years. There's very little space to push legislations through. And, it has meant that, unfortunately, and because, as I've said before, we've not been a country that has had a lot of threats. So very often our attempt to try to modernize our legislative frameworks when it comes to S&I has been more knee-jerk reactions to things that have happened, as opposed to a regular updating of our needs to make sure that we have the authorities to deal with the threats that they are today, and at the same time, there's an accountability aspect to it, which is that our agencies are operating within what is expected based on our values and our Charter of Rights. I think it's a bummer that we're not able to update legislations more often, that we cannot do it more from a strategic standpoint. When I saw the comment earlier from some of the participants about, on top of all the measures that came in the last national security legislations that are about accountability and maintaining trust with citizens. So we have new committee of parliamentarians on national security that have full access to intelligence. We have a new super oversight body that is able to follow the intelligence. We have a new intelligence commissioner on some of the more sensitive aspects. And of course, you have continued parliamentary oversight. And then some of the comments were the courts. But unfortunately, very often what the court's decisions and even some of the oversight bodies are just demonstrating is that somehow our legislations are not able to stay up to date to the evolution of the threats or the evolution of the technology. So I actually think that ideally you should be able to update the national security legislation and make it up to date in terms of both ability to protect the country and then strong accountability to make sure that it's done and consistent with our values, probably on a regular basis every 3 years. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to happen. And a lot of the time and energy will be spent on reviewing some aspects of previous legislation just to make sure that they've lived up to the expectations more from a compliance standpoint. And I think that speaks about the lack of maturity of our S&I environment in Canada. Sorry, long answer, but I thought it was important to give the context.
Well, thank you very much, Danielle. I'm going to close this keynote address. Very insightful comments at first, and then very generous response and candid replies to our several questions. So thank you very much, Danielle, for the time you took to be with us this today.